So I see that people are wondering if we're starting soon. We will, just to give us 1 to 2 more minutes, and we'll start the event. You are at the right place. This is the talk on DNA storage, hosted by MIT Chinese Entrepreneur Organization with Dr. James Banal today. Just a little bit more of patience because people are still coming in. We're going to start in a minute or two. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone to attend our meeting today. My name is Tim. I'll be the moderator for the night. And you are attending the Biotech community event organized by the Chinese Entrepreneur Organization at MIT. And tonight we are talking to Dr. James Banal on the topic of DNA storage. And just want to say that thanks for coming today on this Tuesday night, and I hope that everyone has had a wonderful day so far. So before we start today's event, I want to quickly go over the agenda so that you know what's going to happen and how the night is going to look like. So before we move on to Dr. James' presentation on his work, we will be introducing our organization a little bit, and that will be followed by Dr. James' presentation, and then we're going to move on to an interactive session between James and two of our organization's members on both the technical and entrepreneurial topics. And we'll finish the night by moving on to the Q&A session. So a friendly reminder that please do not hesitate to type your questions for James in the chat box below, and we're all here to learn something today, so don't hold your questions. Now I'll pass on to Wendy, our co-president.
Thanks, Tim. So before we get started with our event, I would like to take 1 minute to quickly introduce our student group. So MIT CEO is a MIT student organization founded 4 years ago. Our mission is to build a community where rising entrepreneurs can learn from renowned professors, entrepreneurs, and investors. So currently we have 5 communities, more than 2,000 active members, and among them more than 200 founders or co-founders in our network. Typically, we host around 20 events on campus every year, and recently during pandemic, we're able to invite more founders not just located in Boston and reach a broader audience. So our communities include biotech, clean tech, AI, consumer, and fintech. Each community hosts regular events focused on innovative trends within each area and provide networking opportunities. So we also have events focusing on entrepreneurship in general, such as Start 101 Bootcamp, which is a virtual bootcamp during summer, a law webinar series focused on startup law and her story featuring women founders, and many networking events. And today's event is presented by our biotech community. And if you like our event, please stay tuned. Tim, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Wendy. And without further ado, I want to welcome James. Hi, James. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, hi. No, this is very great. I'm very thankful for the invitation to talk about DNA data storage. I like to nerd out on a late night. I'm always keen on talking about what's the future for biological computing.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
we're super excited to have you here today. And like you said, it's nice for learning, and we're excited to see your presentation. Yeah.
great. Yeah. All right. So I'm presenting today as a postdoc in the Banal lab at MIT. Data is an ubiquitous word nowadays, especially with the recent Facebook kerfuffle. When we think of data, we think about pictures and music and videos, music and documents comes to mind. But we're in the midst of a tremendous leap for data generation. Everything from our thoughts, um, actions are being recorded through social media, health trackers, personal assistants. And with the genomic revolution, even our own DNA can be uploaded to the cloud. We now use and mine this so-called big data to create new apps and services. But big data has become a big problem. By 2025, our data generation will reach 175 zettabytes, which will surpass the amount of data we can store. Now, that doesn't mean we have to store all of that data. But even if we want to store a smidge of that, let's just say 10% of that, we won't have enough devices to deal with this data's deluge. But how big is 175 zettabytes really? Everyone knows what a terabyte is. Everyone has a terabyte hard drive in their office or in their house. It's about an inch thick. If you stack those 1 terabyte hard drive on top of each other to reach the Empire State Building, you only get up to 40,000 terabytes. If you want to have a 1 zettabyte of hard drives, stack them all together, you can get a bridge between the United States and Africa. With 175 zettabyte stack, you can build a railroad that from Earth and get just close to Venus and ask your good friend Elon to fly you on the last leg of the trip. So that's how much 175 zettabytes is in terms of data. Now, there are other data storage devices besides hard disks. And some of them, for those the young kids who are not familiar with what's in this middle, this is called a tape. They used to be these big platters of disks that are rotating, but now they look like this yay big, and they store a lot of data, but terabytes of data now. And of course the flash memory, which is everywhere from your phone to your laptop. While these devices have been our workhorses for everything, for data and for so far, we'll have to figure out new technologies to address this insatiable desire to store data. This 175 zettabytes data that we'll generate in the future. A lot of these devices break over time. Even when you try to control them in an environment where they operate, like your offices and well-controlled temperatures in a factory, they still break over time. Tapes the same as well. They also become obsolete over time. I don't know how many of you guys remember what a floppy disk is, but I remember what it is. I can't even put this presentation in a floppy disk today. But if you give anyone floppy disk today, they'll probably laugh at you because they don't know how to use that anymore. The point of this is that data storage technologies gets obsolete over time. When was the last time you've heard of an 8-track or a VHS tape? These obsolete technologies, which by the way, were ubiquitous 30 years ago before the USB flash drive replaced all of that. At least you can repurpose them for your flower pot or your coaster for wine. Copying data using conventional storage is painfully slow. Now you might think, so what? Well, if you want to make a backup of that 175 zettabytes, good luck doing that. Because here you're seeing 323 hours for 330 gigabytes. Imagine how long will it take to create, not just one copy, but 20 copies of that data over and over again. And finally, a lot of the data that needs to be stored in a facility will require something like this. It's a Facebook exabyte data center. So an exabyte is 1/1000th of a zettabyte. This exabyte data center is about a football size facility. imagine making 100,000 facilities for just storing your data, right? So it's a lot of space. And so the key question is, can't we just delete the data that we don't want, right? It's just a simple solution. Just delete everything that you don't need, and the world will move in it continually. But how do we know what's critical and important? Maybe it's not important for you, but it might be important for someone else. Maybe it's not important now, but could be critical for some time in the future. What if there's a way you don't have to play Sophie's choice and just store everything? And so that brings us to DNA. Nature has figured out how to store a lot of information using DNA. You've heard of RNA. DNA is its cousin. It encodes a lot of information about life and has a long track record of doing so. The research within the lab asks, can we use the same molecule that stored a lot of information about us, everything about and every living thing in this world, and use the same molecule to store all our cat pictures. But what makes DNA so great compared to all the devices we have so far right now? Well, here's a thumb drive, a conventional data storage drive. The amount of DNA, it contains about 128 gigabytes of data. Your actual thumb, the OG thumb drive, can store about 1,000,000 times more than that. We have evidence to show that we can retrieve DNA from fossils that have experienced the harshest conditions imaginable. Those, if you put your disk drive in there, it will get destroyed within minutes, if not hours. And DNA can survive that for like thousands of years. You can create trillions of copies of DNAs within a few hours easily by taking advantage of biology. And DNA will never be obsolete because we as a species will never be obsolete unless, of course, Skynet takes over and there are no more carbon-based humans. And so how do you go about actually storing data on DNA? Well, what we did is actually take a picture, this cat picture. You convert it to zeros and ones. So each pixel becomes a 0 and 1. And you convert them to DNA. Now, there's a lot of nuance here that I'm skipping, but suffice it to say that there's a lot of complexity from going from picture to bits to DNA. But for all intents and purposes, we just take this as our first layer of encoding. So you convert those zeros and zero, for example, use two continuous ones as T, and two continuous zeros as A, and then you do those for the other combinations. There are a lot, and so the theoretical limit for this encoding is about 2 nucleotides, 2 bits per nucleotide, because that's the number of bits. So 00 is 2 bits and nucleotide is 1A. But in reality, we're just close to that. We're not there yet because there's a lot of on top of things that we need to add, like error correction and all that technical details that I won't talk about today. Once you have that, once you have that as a DNA sequence, you send it to a company. We send it to a company somewhere in Iowa called IDT. We store and access it, and then we read it. Easy, right? Not quite. There's a lot of technical details that goes into that. So the easiest part of this process, at least for me, was to choose the 20 pictures that we wanted to store on DNA. Everyone loves cats. Everyone loves dogs. We have some examples of other types of images that are iconic because once you've seen them, we know that's a building, or that's George Washington, or that's Abraham Lincoln. And basically, once you've converted into DNA, you get this this tubes of DNA from IDT. So essentially, each of those contains one image. And we thought, well, if we're gonna go, more than that, more than 20, like say billion or trillion of those, we can't have them in individual tubes, right? So we need to figure out a way how to condense all of that into this tiny, because in reality, the DNA is just that, and everything else is just vacuum or air, not vacuum, but air. And so it's empty space. And so can we actually condense it to a smaller space? And that's basically what we did. And so the inspiration for that comes from biology. So biology knows how to put nucleic acids in tiny pockets, which we call cells, and be able to store a lot of nucleic acid in there. We basically did that, but instead of something squishy and soft, we did use something hard material, and also chemically stable, which is glass. So these are glass beads, sand, essentially, and they're about the size of a cell. So we're copying biology in terms of dimensions too, and so each of those contained nucleic acid. So essentially, like how we do in the cell. Now that's all well and good, but once you've done this, how do you know which bead contained your nucleic acid? And so this is where we started copying what Google did. So Google became one of the biggest companies, not because of their ability to write information in the internet. Their value increased because the ability to index the information in the internet and be able to search them. And the way they did that is by have a metadata layer. This is oversimplification of what they did, but essentially the way you can search a lot of information in the internet is because of this ability to search through their metadata, whatever indexing, however they index the information in the internet. So we asked, can we do the exact same thing for data storage to make it useful so that people like the average Joe walking the street can actually use it? And that's what we did. That's what we aimed. And in a nutshell, what we did essentially is we did the encapsulation, which I already shown on the other slide. And we added these barcodes on the surface that essentially look like hairballs of DNA, if they need a physical picture. And those hairballs essentially represent metadata. For example, here, you'd store the nucleic acid and codes for the picture of the orange cat, and outside metadata that talks about, is it orange, it's cat, it's domestic, it's a tabby cat, for example, as some examples of metadata you can use. Technically, there is really no limitation. The approach we use there's really no limitation on the how much metadata we can use. But here we use 4 or 3 in our current work. And so once you've done the barcode, then you can pull them together, essentially, and you can identify them individually because of those. Each bead contains a different set of barcodes. And what that allows you to do is to do search, right? So this is where we wanted to go to, is like, can we do exactly like what you can do in a Google search engine? So essentially, can I find, president in 18th century and get Washington essentially from the pool? And I won't go through the technical details, but essentially what we did is, can we find, it's random, our thinking of random access is essentially, can you find a needle in a haystack? And the way we did it is essentially using pulling the needle out of the haystack using a magnet without burning the haystack, which is contrasting existing approaches that actually has to destroy the haystack to find the needle. And I won't go through that, but that's the way we at least for the 30,000 foot view sort of comparison. And essentially what we got is essentially what we got from the sequencing. Once you've read the data you've tried to pull out, we got a picture of Washington. So we've done a lot of different examples. What's really cool about this is we can do and or not logic, which means you can do a lot of very, very crazy computations. Like we've done different permutations, and not, and or, that basically looks like the early days of a database, right? The early database where you can just only do and or not logic. And the one thing that I didn't tell you about the complexity of why this is not simple as just reading it. One of the things that is really challenging is when you actually read the data, you destroy that DNA completely. So what you can do is you can actually take a portion of that you're going to read, put it in bacteria, like what we did in this actually, and make billions of copies again, do the encapsulation and barcoding, and then the other part that you didn't take, that's what you use for the sequencing. So there's a way for us to recover the data that we wanted to read without losing that information over time. And so with all those fancy like demonstrations, can you just send me your data? I can put it all in DNA. Well, the answer is not yet. One is major cost is one of the biggest challenges in the field. Right now, thumb drive costs about less than $10 per gigabyte, whereas storing a gigabyte on DNA is 6 orders of magnitude still too expensive currently with recurrent synthesis. In terms of latency is also still slow. So writing data using conventional DNA synthesizers, 10 megabytes per day is our estimate without knowing exactly how many DNA synthesis comes out here, but knowing some ideas of their throughput. My ability to search the pool, the one we demonstrated, the Google search approach, that's still too slow. 10 gigabyte per second sounds fast, but when we're talking about zettabytes rather, that's really slow. It's gonna take you many years to find one file. So we need to figure out how to maybe partition it such that you search only, say, 10 terabytes per pool. You're gonna make many different 10 terabyte pools, but essentially you'll be able to find that faster, and not only searching for one, but doing more than 1,000 searches. That's actually the key, because you're not gonna just search one stuff in your data pool. You're gonna probably search more than 1,000 times, 100 times. And sequencing is still too slow to do this. Am I hopeful? Yes, that we will get there. This is our humble beginnings. This IBM data storage, we started at $640 per megabyte per month in pricing. Now 0.02002 megabyte per dollars per megabyte in current standards, and it's way larger now. It's one-off, right? In terms of cost, though, I believe it's going to go down. Absolutely. We did the Human Genome Project, and sequencing the entire genome costed about $300,000. In 2016, that dropped to $600, 6 orders of magnitude. And so, the span by which we dropped the cost of data storage was actually slower compared to how much we dropped the cost of sequencing. And sequencing preceded DNA writing advances. And so I do believe that someday, we'll get to those technical milestones that we'll be able to write DNA cheaply and quickly as needed. And that I want to leave enough time for some of the discussions. And so I'd like to end here, acknowledging some of the folks that are very critical on the work I sort of brushed over in the lab, and some of the publications that validated our approach. With that, I'm now happy to chat more about DNA data storage.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. It was really inspirational, and how kind of you made the analogy in the beginning, as well as the comparison you made, how exactly it is in terms of the sequencing indexing you do between DNA storage and what Google does. That kind of really helps me to understand what exactly is happening better as someone who does not have a lot of background in this area. Now I would just like to welcome Scott and Bowen, who are two members of our organization, to come up and they have a few questions prepared, and they're very excited to kickstart kind of a discussion with you on both technical as well as entrepreneurial fronts. So Scott and Bowen, please introduce yourself a little bit too for everyone.
Hi, James. Hi, everyone. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Scott, and I'm very happy to be here and have a discussion with James. So personally, I work at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard as a research scientist. And my project is also on DNA storage, but I work more on the synthesis side. So very exciting to have this discussion. I guess I'll give the time to Bowen right now.
Yeah, hey James, hey everyone. Yeah, I'm Bowen. I'm currently the third year PhD student at MIT ECS. My research direction is about artificial intelligence, computer vision, and so today I'm very happy to be the one here to discuss with James and yeah, to share some experience. Thank you.
Great.
Great. So I guess I will start with a few technical questions. So I guess on the larger scheme, we talked about how a DNA storage work and how the searching and kind of indexing that you put into this. So what do you think that a DNA-based data storage promise, like fundamentally different from the other methods?
Yeah, I mean, so there are two different ways to think about this. The way I want to think about it, like to emphasize in the beginning, is that it's never going to be, DNA is not going to replace your phone for watching TikTok or whatever. What it will replace, though, it's definitely, it's for data that it's useful for data that you rarely access. You want to keep for a long time, but you rarely access. And so that's what we call cold data. And some examples of that do exist, like Amazon Glacier or something like that, something similar. And so I want to begin with that because that's an important distinction. In terms of what it will bring in that's different, it's just this density, right? A is the density. B is the amount of energy you need to use to maintain it, which is essentially zero once you do the chemical fossilization. And three, it's the search capabilities. The really crazy thing about DNA is that we're searching in 3D volume now, right? We're not anymore limited in 2D. There are 3D data storage systems, but you have volumetric movement of data, and you can use this jiggling of molecules in solution that you can take advantage to do computation. And I think that's very exciting. That's very unique from, say, the prospects of, say, flash drives or other data storage systems. So yeah, so I think those are things that I think what makes the data storage different.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very exciting. And I always get amazed that for DNA storage, we are using just a few tens of atoms to use as a unit of data, right? And then so back to what you store in a capsulation, for example, like what type of DNA, or like, for example, length or any special treatment that you put for the DNA, like what kind of DNA that you can store in this encapsulation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, any nucleic acids, actually, we just got a paper accepted. Also, I was showing also you can put RNA too, which is, I thought will never work, but because RNA has been notoriously thought to be very brittle, but it turns out it's not. And so you could put any nucleic acid. And so essentially this fossilization chemistry is a very old chemistry. Actually the origins of this was actually a part of this actually started at MIT too with Bob Langer. He was doing a lot using silica to deliver plasmid DNA basically as a delivery vehicle before they figured out they want to use something more soft like what you use now for Moderna and Pfizer, essentially. And so yeah, basically that's like the early origins of those. So like silicification chemistry, essentially you encapsulate in glass, you remove the water out of the DNA, and so chemically chemically it should be still the same, and we demonstrated that, and we can actually preserve, in fact, the functional characteristics of that DNA that we store, which is a plasmid, so it's circular, and it should be able. And the way we demonstrated that was we encapsulated the plasmid, we removed the encapsulation, we cracked the egg open, and then we took the DNA out and essentially put it back in the bacteria and see if it can grow. That bacteria can copy that, and that's what we did essentially. And so that silicification chemistry is pretty benign to any nucleic acid. Actually, anything that's a negative charge. So there's a lot of different nucleic acids that not nucleic acids essentially, but other polymers. Let's call them sequence-controlled polymers, like that are coming, and that we could also use for this system. So we don't really care which one who wins the DNA rights, not the data, but the molecular data rights space. I think it's going to be DNA, but I'm biased.
Right. That's very exciting. That is more universal, and yeah. So as you said that, right? So this capsulation can work with many types of DNA. So do you think which one is more difficult? Encapsulating this DNA, or adding multiple tags on the surface so you can do kind of search and or logic, especially when you put multiple barcodes on one bead. For example, I would imagine that will require quite some precision.
Yeah, I mean, so to be honest, like the hardest part there, well, not the hardest, like all of that is like established chemistries. I didn't do anything fancy. I think, if I can, twist the question a little bit to, against me, it's like, what's like the hardest thing to innovate upon is probably the encapsulation, simply because, the fossilization chemistry, while it's fast, it's within a few days. It's better than nature, essentially. That's what I always say to people. Hey, I did it in 4 days. Try to do it. Let's see how nature does it. I did it in 4 days, but still that's too long to fossilize something, right? And so that's something that's a limitation right now. It's the latency to encapsulate. The barcoding is pretty quick. It's essentially chemistry that's well known and very quick and very fast chemistry. But encapsulation that was actually the limitation of our work, but there are alternatives, and obviously we're working on that, how to make that faster, such that it, instead of days, can be minutes. But that's still TBD on how it does. So I think like challenging, to answer your question. I think for me as a chemist, I'm a chemist by training. The encapsulation part is always the tricky bit for me, because I think I'll have to look at how engineering people does it, and there's a lot of those examples in the Broad where you make tiny droplets using very tiny tubes called microfluidic devices that essentially can make my encapsulation process a lot faster and more facile, and that's, I think, an exciting direction to think about.
Oh, so you were advancing into microfluidics methods.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm very fascinated about how you're creating those. I mean, nature does this too, basically, like creating these vacuoles. Like we don't use pipes or anything, but nature is really good at this. So why fix what ain't broke, as they say.
Right. So I like the the synergy that you make between opening up a capsule versus cracking up a egg. So after you receive the data, from one of your silica package, or I don't know what you call them, but so can you kind of encapsulate them, or do you have to make a chicken out of the egg and then make another egg? To use a
no, I love that analogy. So when you open the egg, you essentially, we can do two things, right? So you can directly put in a sequencer with the information, and you're good to go in your the other thing you can do is to split that pool. You take the other half and put it into bacteria and make multiple copies. You can make more. I guess it's not anymore an egg. Maybe it's chicken. Whatever. But it's like you can make more stuff, more of the DNA that you actually selected for. And then the other half, you put the sequencing, or you do what other people do is do PCR, which is also another way to make multiple copies of the same file without a lot of the criticism. A lot of the criticism around DNA data storage and why people are very skeptic about this is, it's a very slow. Forget about latency, forget about cost. The other thing is that you destroy the information, and people in the data storage sort of business are very conservative, and they have the right to be so. If you just tell them we actually destroy your data, they get a sweat. So there's a lot of criticism you can get from that, but there is a way. They don't understand yet that you can actually make copies that unlike you can do in data.
I think that is kind of a different perspective on DNA data storage, because it's not working on quote unquote hot data. It's on cold data, right? So I guess another thing is whether you can. Is there any way that you can change the data, change the DNA inside a capsulate, in the little shells without breaking them? Do you think that's a possibility?
The answer is right now with the current information is no, and I think there's a benefit to that. The way since you're in machine learning, Bowen's actually in machine learning. You'll appreciate this. It's like GitHub version control. So once you've encapsulated it, the data inside is immutable, and so that's actually a plus, because there are cases where you want your data to be, you want a version of that, so you can keep creating that data. Keep adding new versions of that data without creating many mutants. So there is a value towards not like encapsulate, take a snapshot. It's basically like version control. It's like, I know I use a lot of analogies here, but it's like GitHub, essentially, like GitHub for DNA is the way I think about our encapsulation approach. Is we take a snapshot, that's your version, and then and there's a lot of applications for that, for people who want to store a lot of archives, right? So I mean, a really good example of that would probably be financial records, right? You don't want someone tampering. So, CRISPR is so easy nowadays. They probably could hire someone from undergrad at MIT. Like, can you make a change? So you don't want that. So at least our approach, this allows for any more changes once you've encapsulated it. So the answer is you can't. But if there are technologies like CRISPR, right? So if it is not encapsulated,
I think that is, depending on your perspective, it can be a pro or a con. And I guess for cold data storage, really locked out any editing can be a plus. And then you use the word fossilization, right? So this will really lead, naturally lead to a question on how do you store your silica beads after you encapsulate DNA in them.
So once you've encapsulated them, essentially, it's you can just put in your pocket, and it's fine. You can spit on it. You can, I don't know, you want to do with it. It's pretty hardy. It's a pretty hardy shell, and glass is just pretty hardy. It's actually the only way you can dissolve it is just with one chemical that a lot of people in our lab are very scared to touch of, but it's really nothing. I'm kidding. It's a hydrofluoric acid. There are, if you try with other reagents that are more, let's just say, corrosive than hydrofluoric acid, you'll destroy the DNA too. So that's the only actually out of a lot of the chemical spectrum, hydrofluoric acid was the only one that dissolved the glass, but surprisingly doesn't destroy the DNA nor the RNA that is encapsulated. So essentially anything else other than hydrofluoric acid it can withstand. Of course, I'm skipping a lot of scenarios here. What if someone put this into 300-degree oven? of course, it will calcify essentially, like basically burn off the carbon, so the DNA will get destroyed that way. So you can't launch it into the sun, but you can launch it in the moon. You know, tell your friend Elon, here's the entire Library of Congress. Let's put it in the moon. And so, or you maybe put your Bitcoin in the DNA somehow and fossilize it, so it will survive in the moon and be able to get it back.
Right. So as we are approaching to kind of the end of my session, just a couple more questions. So one is, how does COVID influence your kind of work, technology development? And I guess this can also lead into the kind of the business side of the things, which is, basically how did COVID and the kind of the mitigation of it affect your work?
Yeah, COVID actually created a different thinking around how we actually value nucleic acids and information mediums. So one of the things that happened during COVID time was, instead of waiting for synthesis to become cheaper, why don't I collect nucleic acids from the environment? Like, basically, what if I had the ability to store, say, your nasal swab? maybe instead of giving it to the guy where you drop off your nasal swab, you give some to me and I can store everything. And the reason why is then you can go back and say, you do qPCR to see it's positive, negative, but there's so much information stored in nucleic acids. Like, what's the COVID strain you have, and so something like that, which is apparently very important now. And so having something that came out of that because of COVID is like, can we actually adapt this? And that's something that we actually work on. I work on during COVID time, and turns out can work too on that sort of scale of thinking. Yeah.
Great. And my final question would be looking into the future. So what do you think in the next maybe 3 years or so, kind of the best add-on or best new advance you would like to have for this kind of technology platform?
Like what do I see as like the next milestone?
What would you like to additional technology advance would you like to have on from here?
No, I mean, I think you and I know the same answer. It's DNA writing becomes cheaper 6 orders of magnitude. That's actually the biggest problem right now. Like honestly, that's stopping a lot of innovation in a lot of different areas, because you don't have scale of samples you can use, and without that, you don't know where your system breaks. So for me, the biggest milestone will be to see how nucleic acid synthesis becomes cheap, or is there a way that we don't really care about, because we're working with data. We're not working with perfect biology, genomes, or nucleic acids. We can allow for errors. And so I think we're going to get there in the next 2 years. And so I think, I see that as the biggest milestone that hopefully the field will see in the next three years or so.
Well, great. I guess that's my work. Okay. Thank you very much. So I guess we just hit 9:45. So I guess it's the perfect time to hand it to Bowen and move on to our next session. Thank you very much for great technical insights.
Okay, thanks, Scott, and thanks, James, for sharing this technical stuff. So I'm going to ask you some question about in the business aspect.
Sure.
But unfortunately, I'm not the expert in the biotech, and I'm also not the expert in the business. So I may have some may not be able to capture the whole of the points of your answer, but yeah, I will try my best. So my first question would be that since the DNA storage technique is it's existing, it's not new, but it has lots of applications. So what I want to know is that what's the difference between the cache DNA that's your company with the other companies like HelixWorks, Catalog, in terms of the your target main customers and market, something like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not part of Cash yet, but I'll be happy to talk about some of our ideas. Um, the idea of Cash is different in the way that our thinking is. The whole the whole internet became the biggest thing, not because our ability to write, just not just on our ability to write the internet, but on our ability to index information. And so that's something that from our side was apparent because the reality is there's so many people working on DNA write, there's so many people working on DNA read, and not a lot of people are thinking about the random access, which I think is going to be the biggest thing. Because I mean IBM didn't become well known until like Microsoft came in and like we'll put an OS operating file system can do all this search and computation. So that's what we were thinking in the beginning, and that's where we are very unique in this space because we're working on the random access. And a lot of the technology development for cache doesn't rely on DNA synthesis right now. A lot of it we can already apply to a lot of different areas like diagnostics, like I was mentioning about storing nucleic acids from, say, patients, from oncology patients, from phase 3 trial patients, and store them now, maybe sequence them later, because you don't have to sequence everything now. Sequencing, as it stands, is still not expensive, and not that an average Joe walking in the street can't afford it. And so having the ability to still have a snapshot of your nucleic acid for cheap, for nothing, essentially like less than $10, and that's it. You can basically have a whole picture of your nucleic acid profile. Say, when did I develop this? Like there's this whole area of epigenomics, like how your genes changes, right? And so that's one area where we're unique because we're not waiting or we're not betting a lot on the technical milestone of even if DNA writing doesn't happen. I'm not saying it will not. I'm saying even if it takes 5-10 years longer, it doesn't matter. We can get an ROI from investors because we have a different market that also has substantially more. Well, not substantially more, but has some market value that we can add into the market, namely storing nucleic acids from patients or from the environment. So that's how we think. Because Catalog is a great company that does a lot of DNA writing, but maybe some point we will converge, and we'll see. Hey, you might want to use our file system, and maybe we'll make you the whole. We'll make you the IBM. Will be like Microsoft. So yeah. That's the hope.
I see. So yeah. So now, from my understanding, that means that everything is in the very initial phase. So maybe you.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
it's very right now. Yeah. So like the way I'm thinking about it is like the DNA write, access, and read. Everyone's working on the two ends. Not everyone's not a lot of people working on the middle.
I see. Got it. Okay. Thank you. And my next question is that it's a little bit more general. Like, so what do you think is the biggest challenge in working on your startup? And on the other, and the second one is, what do you think is the biggest challenge for, in general, biotech startups? Like, first one is, what's your,
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge is, and not that actually, the biggest challenge I think would be not a lot. It's you can't really put this into a category. It's not Boston Biotech or San Francisco Silicon Valley, right? It's somewhere in between. And so it is definitely a deep tech or hard tech or whatever you want to call it. It's something that has a lot of a lot of technical risk that still has to be achieved, but there's huge potential upside on the market if it actually happens to work. And so in that sort of category, it's pretty hard for me to convince folks that this is actually worth thinking or putting money into, because there's a lot of technical risks involved with this, and a lot of the demonstrations, unfortunately, it speaks on the field in a larger view. Like we're still working with toy systems. We haven't really tried to do something demonstrated in the more commercial sense. But I think there are companies out there who are working in that category. So I think that's the challenge for like area of startup where I am. in biotech at large, I think a lot of challenges. I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of people I know of, and so I'm gonna just make it as vague as possible. And so I think it's all this. The idea of biotech Boston is this old white male being the CEO, but I think there are very brilliant, very hungry, very great people, and I've worked with them, I've talked with them, that they could be CEOs too. I think investors need to take a chance on these people, mentor them, teach them how to. It can't be just the old white male typical CEO that you'll see in Boston. I think I have some awesome colleagues, and not just generally. I still think I don't want to get gender discussions, but essentially I think there's a lot more we need to fix on how to make the gender balance and all that in terms of the biotech CEOs and who gets invested and who doesn't get investment. So yeah, so I think those just my quick thoughts on that.
Got it. So for you, it's like from my understanding, it's like mainly it's the commercialized something like that, and
yeah.
For the yeah, got it. Okay. Okay, thank you. And I think it's time to move to the maybe next session, I think.
This is a perfect time, and thanks Scott, Bowen, as well as James for this really interactive discussion. Scott and Bowen, please don't go, because I think I'll definitely might leverage some of your knowledge and expertise in deciphering some of the questions. And I just want to say thank you for the audience who have left their questions. It was a long wait, and now we'll get to them. So the first question that we want to ask, and is actually the earliest question, is, so James, what is the estimated size of the genomic sequence of all organisms on Earth?
Wow.
This looks like a really specific question, so try our best. It's not like
no. That's. I mean, oh man. I mean, we can do back of an envelope, right? I mean, oh man, there's a lot of species like we don't know yet because they're under this. For example, some of them are under the sea, but let's see. Like, there's probably like 50,000 organisms that are like sequenced right now in the internet. Let's just say so I said 50,000. Let's just make it 10,000 order of magnitude, and then let's see. They're roughly like 1 megabase, and let's just say 1 megabase is 1 megabyte. So that's about so like 10,000 times 10 times 1 megabyte. Yeah, so 10,000 megabytes essentially. That's 10 gig. That's pretty small. But there's a lot more organisms. Like, there are probably millions. So I mean, it's probably more than an exabyte easily. It's probably more than a zettabyte if you also take into account that there's like multiple number of cells, right, per organism, and that's a hard sort of level of extrapolation. But I'd say it's more than a zettabyte for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that reminds me of like those Fermi questions you would do when you want to estimate something kind of by and large, but you can always break down things even to a lower granular level. But anyways, let's move on to the next question. So this one is about, I think two questions touch on a very similar topic, which is around kind of privacy and safety. So the first one is essentially asking, like, what comment do you have on data security with DNA storage? And the second one, which is very similar, is also on the similar topic, but this essentially is about privacy. So safety, security, and privacy. What are the other comments you have around this?
Yeah. So I mean, one thing I didn't touch on the encoding, this is why I emphasize a little bit that there's a lot of technical details there, is that even if you knew the sequence, if you don't know how to decode it, it's kind of a jumbled DNA sequence. In fact, if you don't know the key to the whole sequence, you won't be able to decode it. So there is a way. That doesn't mean that a nefarious actor wouldn't be able to get that key somewhere or somehow. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. But essentially, even if you're able to read, you need to have the key. So it's not as easy as if I have a sequence, I can just put a decoder, you're done. and you can do a lot of different tricks on encryption. There's a lot of whole field of DNA and DNA encryption to deal with that. And so there is a way. I mean, the thing is now it's so small. You can imagine having the whole internet in your pocket. Someone can just take it from your pocket and basically lose it. But that's definitely a personal a risk that yeah, that's something we have to think about. But no, in terms of just being able to read it, it's fine, because as long as you don't know the key, you won't be able to know how to decode the DNA sequence.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because it sounds like something that, as you know, the whole DNA storage grows, there'll be more protections, more measures around this, but at the same time, more risks that kind of also come up as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Great. So I want to move on to the next question. So someone has asked, essentially, they're asking, what is the advantage for DNA storage over brain memory? So, you know, word by word, what the person says is, definitely we know that DNA included memory, but what is the process about brain memory modification technology compared to DNA? Maybe Scott or James, you could try to interpret this question a little bit.
I mean, brain memory, when I hear brain memory, I think about neuromorphic computing, but that's probably a very different, that's not storage, that's for computing essentially. So there are devices that try to mimic how the brain works, using, you know, silicon-based devices, and essentially trying to mimic that. I mean, in a nutshell, I think what the reason why DNA is really powerful, which I didn't touch on too much because you know, we still have a lot of preliminary data on that, essentially is the ability to parallelize the computation in a 3D volume. That's really the power of molecules. When you convert a problem into a molecular scale, you can think about Avogadro's number. That's 6 times to the 23rd power. That's how many processors in theory you can use to do a computation. Not even quantum computing can have that tomorrow. We can have that in theory. And so that is the most powerful thing to think about when you think about molecules. Think about Avogadro's number, because that's how many processors you're going to do, processing units you can use to do any computation. So I think that's I think if you're talking about neuromorphic computing, about brain-like computing, that's how I think about it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I hope that answers your question for this audience. Let me move on to the next question. So the person asks, I think maybe the person wants to understand a bit more in terms of the actual working of it, what's happening under the hood. So how to decode the data once they're stored on DNA.
Yeah, no, I could put a whole talk about how to decode the data on DNA. It's actually not trivial. Well, so once you've got the DNA, you'll have a lot of those pieces of the same DNA, right? DNA strands, synthetic DNA, they're not perfect. They have a lot of errors, and everyone knows this. And so, you know, you have to put error correction codes, corrections, errors from the sequencing, from the reads. So that's why you need to do multiple X. And I know the Broad is working how to do just 1X coverage reads now. But for us plebeians who are not in the Broad, we have to work with multiple X coverage essentially. And so one of the things that that was the challenge. So that's the thing. And so the reason why I'm bringing that up is because you need to read the DNA multiple times, align the DNA sequences, do a decoding, do some clustering of those sequences, how similar they are in sequence space, and see and do. There's a lot of algorithms that can come into play, and then once you have gotten a consensus sequence, perhaps then you can just use that to generate back your image after that. So that's the entire process in a nutshell, without going into too much technical details. But essentially, there's a lot of alignment, there's a lot of error correction that has to happen, because a lot of things can happen, can go wrong. They're pretty small errors, but still they're not negligible, and that can, you know, have a sort of multiplicative effect on your reading and reading back. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And that brings us to our final question, which is, what is the impact of indexing the data in DNA storage? Well, the indexing like break or kind of damage the capsule?
No, so it's a chemical process that essentially attaches covalently the DNA on the surface of silica. So it doesn't damage it. If anything, it actually protects the surface from, from any other stuff, because you have this very poorly electrolyte surface, negatively charged, highly charged surface that would push away other stuff. So that's possibly, yeah. It doesn't break the capsule is the short answer.
Okay, so thanks for the response. And I actually lied because one more question just popped in, and I think the person asked around patenting, and the actual question is like if you have patented your technology. So
yeah, I won't be speaking here if it's not patented. I'm kidding. No, we spent a lot of time patenting before publishing. That's why it took us a while to publish the stuff we have, because we wanted to patent some ideas first, being it to proof of concept and to put in a patent. So definitely they're patent pending, but they're not patented yet, as far as I know. But I don't know. I haven't looked if they're patent or they're granted already, but I think they're patent pending still. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. The questions just keep coming in, and I mean, since we still have time, I'm just gonna throw them at you. Yeah. So the read and write speed of the DNA storage is limited compared to current electronic storage solutions. What is the future direction regarding the write and read speed of DNA storage? So where is it headed?
Yeah. This is a great question, and so this is where a lot of the I mentioned earlier, where the criticisms coming from the data storage community is. It's just so slow in terms of where everything is in the data storage stack. I do think we're gonna get as close as possible to tape. I think that's a feasible benchmark to put us into. Essentially, in tape, you need to put in the real get the data out. There's a reader. It's like a VHS tape if you know what it is, but if not, it's basically just reading off the tape the data. I think we're gonna get there through numerous things. I mean, I can talk about it because we haven't seen the pattern. There's a lot of ways we can learn from Akamai called edge computing. Essentially, you do distributed. You basically, because I can make a lot of these capsules, make multiple copies. I can send one to Boston, San Francisco, London, whatever, Hong Kong. All of them doing the same search, doing the same sequencing, and whoever wins, and something like that probably is the best way to do it. But I don't know yet. Because I haven't tried. I don't have. If someone has $5 million, we can give it a shot. And so that's something that you can think of that you can do, because they're so small, so tiny. You don't need a lot of space to do this. And so I think the future would be as close to tape, but it'll never be as fast as a hard disk. That's for sure.
Okay.
So I think to build on the privacy question, I think one of the so we talk about you need kind of the key to open your data, but I think another aspect that people are thinking about is really genomes or nuclear, or DNAs and RNAs actually from your body. So this is also kind of a business model question, which is what type of data are you more kind of, at least for now, focusing on storage, right? So would you like to store kind of human-made data, which means like pictures or music, right? Or are you actually interested in encapsulating actual DNA in the nature or in your body for kind of future investigation?
Yeah, I mean, there's the answer is I want to do both, but unfortunately, DNA synthesis is too expensive, so I can only do the other one. And so, storing nucleic acid of, say, a patient, for example, and there is a lot of privacy issues that you need to go there. A really good example is consent, right? A really good example of that is 23andMe and their biobanking consent forms, right? And so there is a lot of, it's not as easy as, I'll store your nucleic acid and we're done. there's a lot of conversation needs to be had, or like legal things that needs to be had to if anonymizing nucleic acids is very hard because obviously, and so I think that's a valid point if you want to think about in the lens of nucleic acid that's naturally available, because then there's all sorts of privacy issues that we need to have a dialogue with the public on how do we want to leverage information from genomics data. And I think there's a model for that already because of the preponderance of 23andMe and all these personal genomics companies, not just 23andMe. So I think there's a model for that, and we just have to look at how to actually navigate that sensitive topic through those examples.
Great, thank you. And if it is okay, I want to just add a comment to the last question about the rewrite speed. I think we do see a trend of evolution, at least for the for the reading of DNA sequence. So for example, sequencing has several generations, right? And right now, the most common one is the sequencing by synthesis. And this you're doing base by base synthesis. And then you cannot do a flow. But the next kind of in the future, if we're looking to say nanopore technology and some other of this technology on this measure, they actually can have a continuous reading so that you get kind of a stream of reading. So this really kind of speed up, can speed up and miniaturize the sequencing device and then speed. So I think the same trend is probably going to happen on the writing side as well. So I think we should stay sanguine on this, I guess, so that do not dismiss the the future.
Yeah, I mean, like I think given speeds of nanopores, right? And I know there's a company called Iridia doing this very nicely. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, and I think will ever be faster than hard disk. I don't know. I mean, it really depends on how you organize the sectors. There might be a way to get it in that way, but yeah, I mean, I'm very optimistic. I'm a careful optimist. So I think we're gonna get. I think at the minimum we're gonna get tape drive speeds. That's my prediction in the next 5 years or so, or 10 years or so. In terms of speed of reading. So, but who knows after that?
Okay, looks like we have touched on a lot of interesting topics and threads of conversations that we can probably expand into another full-blown hour-long, talk. But if there are no more questions from the audience, I just want to kind of advertise our upcoming events because this is a word for the audience. This is one of the episodes organized by the MIT Chinese Entrepreneur Organization. And specifically, we have 5 communities. You're attending one of the biotech communities event. We do have more events upcoming. We have another one coming up in November with Professor Rong. The actual topic is still pending in the air, but we will advertise as soon as we know. And if you are interested, please sign up our newsletter. Check out our LinkedIn, our website, or follow us on WeChat if you have WeChat. We are always very dedicated to organizing events like this, inviting people from biotech, from other deep tech areas, and just have a chat and bounce ideas off each other. And I just want to say thank you so much to James, to Scott, Bowen, and everyone for sharing your thoughts, having these awesome conversations. Thank you a lot. Yeah, so take some time to scan the code, and I hope everyone have a wonderful evening.
Everyone.
So this concludes our event today, and yeah, and everyone, you can move on to the rest of our night.